Hi, wonderful people. I'm Leah Rapaner. As a sociologist, University of Melbourne professor, founder of the Gender Equity Initiative, director of the Future of Work Lab, woman, wife, and mother, I've made it my life's mission to take down every ridiculous gender myth out there. Together, we'll deep dive into the research to get to the bottom of all these misperceptions that are holding all of us back. Don't worry, I've studied these types of questions for decades, and after publishing countless articles exactly on these topics, I know when they are nonsense or real truths. And I'm going to help you learn that too. So here we go. Let's do it. This is Misperceived. Hi, everyone. On today's episode of Misperceived, we're going to ask the question, is it bad for you to have a long-distance romantic relationship? Like, is it a problem if you live away from your partner? And does that mean that your relationship is bad? I'm going to talk to you about an article by Gretchen Kelmer, Galanek Rhodes, Scott Stanley, and Howard Markman. And it's called Relationship Quality, Commitment, and Stability in Long-Distance Relationships. And it came out in Family Process in 2013. And they basically make this argument that, like, hey, there's a bunch of reasons why people who are romantically linked or in partnerships live apart from each other. Sometimes this can be about, you're pursuing different career opportunities. Sometimes you're going to different schools, right? There's education happening in there. You might be in the military and deployed. There might be incarceration. There might be immigration restrictions, or there could be some sort of responsibility to your family or to your parents. And one of the things that they say is that there's this kind of attitude that having a distance in your relationship, that living geographically apart is bad, is that actually your relationship will fail, that if you live too far apart. So how do we understand whether that's true? The research on this is a bit mixed. Some studies show that if you live further from your partner, you have lower relationship quality than if you live closer. Others find that if you're in a long distance relationship, that you share less information, you report lower relationship satisfaction, and that maybe you feel like you're less close, you're less of companions in your partnerships. There's some evidence that, you can be more depressed if you live further apart than if you're in closer relationships. But there's other studies that show actually being in a long distance relationship can be good for you. It can increase your satisfaction, that those relationships can be positive. So some show that, if you're in a long distance relationship, that there's no difference in terms of, self-disclosure or your affection, feelings of self-worth, the help you give each other, the nurturing you give each other, or whether you take your partner's perspective. There's other research showing that long distance relationships, you have similar levels of intimacy and seriousness and trust. And they talk about there's several ways in which long distance relationships could actually lead to better relationship quality than if you live close to your partner. The first is this idea of selection, that people who choose to live further from each other in their romantic relationships, they might have stronger relationships. Like they might actually be closer. And if you have a really fragile relationship, you might not move further apart. So there's a selection into it. People with stronger foundations will choose to live apart, and therefore the relationship will stay closer. The other reason is that what I'm calling experience, but basically if you're not living with someone in the day-to-day, you don't get annoyed with the person in the day-to-day. You aren't exposed to what they call daily hassles and what I call just their general annoying characteristics of having someone in the same room breathing next to you 24 hours a day. That can create stress, tension, annoyance, how they load the dishwasher, how they leave the toilet seat up, how they don't flush the toilet. I mean, these are all things I do, so that's what Casey's annoyed with me about. So all of these little things that you do in the day-to-day may annoy the other partner, and therefore that can create conflict and tension. The other thing they talk about is if you're in a long distance relationship, the way you view your time together is different. When you actually come together, you spend more quality time together. If you're together all the time is big, time is infinite, then, every minute isn't special. You're trying to just get through the day-to-day, and perhaps you don't have enough special minutes. And so they're talking about those who live further from each other sometimes end up doing really great things when they are together. They end up having good experiences, do fun stuff. And they also tend to avoid conflict because they know that the time is short, and so they're going to make the most of it. The other thing they talk about is that sex hormones, basically, if you're further from someone, they find that actually there is a sexual response that comes upon reunion, what they call the honeymoon effect. And they say that actually women's testosterone spikes prior to the reunion, and this can make a really wonderful first engaging sexual activity following an abstinence, a period of separation. That actually, I'll just translate that for you. The longer you are apart before you get together, your testosterone goes up, and it means that your sex becomes better. So there's some research showing that. And they call this the honeymoon effect, that coming back together create these kind of moments of positive connection. So this is the big questions they're asking. Like, does it matter if you live near your partner or if you live far from your partner? What does previous research show? And what could be the factors that explain it? They talk about two kind of general things. One is that there's this dedication. You're more dedicated to a relationship. You're more committed to one's future's plans. You prioritize a relationship and you have a shared sense of identity. That's keys to dedication. So if you are dedicated to your partner, you want to continue the relationship, you plan for the future, you prioritize the relationship, and you have a shared sense of identity. The second thing is that there's a constraint commitment. This is the idea that, like, basically you might not like that person, or you might have obstacles or barriers that make it difficult to end a relationship. So it might be that you have these social connections, these moral connections, or these emotional connections. And so there's kind of two things that keep people together. Are you dedicated to that person? Do you see them as the future? And then what is the barrier to exit? What are the constraints? Is it hard for you to get out? And what they argue is that, like, hey, basically long distance relationships, you might have high dedication because you're living apart but want to be together, but you also have very low constraints. You have constraints to getting you out of it. You don't share a cell phone. You're not in the same house. You don't have to share the bills or whatever. Economically or whatever, you can split pretty easily. So this could be something that could actually decrease the chance of these going well. To answer this question, they take a nationally representative study of 870 people, 345 men and 525 women. And basically they identify a long distance relationship as anyone who lives more than 50 miles away from the other person. Now, you might think that's kind of close. I think there is a question about 50 miles versus 100 miles versus 200 miles. For those of you who are thinking in kilometers, I can't answer that question for you. But thinking about this as distance of maybe living in another town or further. I think it matters whether you live on the other side of the country, but this can be a limitation of the study. So they ask people a range of questions. They ask them about, is your relationship high quality? Is it functioning? Are you satisfied sexually? Do you love your partner? Do you have fun with your partner? Do you have good conversations? Do you have problematic communication? Like, are you swearing at each other, yelling, stomping out of the house? Are you dedicated to your partner? Do you see it as an us and a we, or do you see it as a him and a her relationship? And then how do you see the constraints? Can you get out of the relationship? Would you lose money if you actually left this partner? Would you lose friendships? Would you have trouble finding someone else? So this is like the constraint. This is the perceived constraint. And then they ask them about like material constraints. Do you own a pet together? Do you share a mobile phone plan? Do you make major purchase together? Do you pay each other's bills? And so they're trying to figure out, what are the perceived constraints? What are the material constraints? And then the next one is the felt constraints. Do you feel trapped in the relationship? Would you leave your partner, but it's too difficult? Do you feel stuck? So they have all these different measures of constraints. What do they find? Are you dying to know? What do you predict? If you were like me, you were very hopeful that you had made all the right decisions by living in the same household with your partner. And you were hoping that they show that close proximity is really better than long distance. If you're like me and you looked at the results of the study, you found that you were absolutely wrong. They find pretty much that across almost all of the conditions that living in a long distance relationship actually led to better outcomes than being in close proximity. They found that people had better relationship adjustments living long distance compared to those in close proximity. They had more love for their partner. They had more fun with their partner. They had better conversations. They had less psychological aggression between the people. They had fewer communication of danger signs. They had greater dedication, stronger dedication. There were fewer material constraints. There were fewer felt constraints. These people who were living apart were more likely to say that they expect to marry that other person. And they're also less likely to say they're going to break up with that other person. So living apart from each other for this sample at this moment in time in which they surveyed US adults, they found that those living in long distance relationships reported a range of better outcomes on their relationships than those who were living in close proximity. So, what should you do? Should you immediately move out of the house, get a second place 50 miles away, and see if all of these factors increase? I'm going to say to you, no. Part of the reason is that the effects were not super, super big, in particular for things like love for the partner and having fun. So it wasn't like those who were living in close proximity had like no fun with their partner. It's just they had a little bit more fun, a little bit more love than those who are in long distance relationships. The authors also talk about the fact that there could be two things going on simultaneously. Like the first is who is selecting into it, right? It might be that there are certain people who at that moment in time are choosing to live apart. And there's something about those people in terms of the selection about why they're living 50 miles plus away that may lead to all of these better outcomes. What that means is that if you make this decision, because this group is very unique, you're not going to necessarily reap the rewards. So don't do it. The second thing they talk about is their experiences. The fact that, long distance relationships do seem to have different experiences in them. The dynamics are different. And so may I make a recommendation if you are partnered and living in close proximity? The goal would be to create moments within your relationship that feel like you're not living together, that give you the space to have fun, that give you the space for deep communication, that allow you to reconnect in a way that brings you back together. And so thinking about what is it about the fact that when you live apart and then you have that time together that is precious, that makes you more valuing of each other and that connection and the love that you share. So instead of throwing your life upside down and moving into an apartment on the beach, my recommendation would be to actually think about what it is about that time and connection and specialness and try to recreate it in the day-to-day when you're living together. What do you think about this? Have you lived apart from your partner and did it go well? Did it not? What were your vibes? What were the feelings? Like, how did it go for you? I find it very difficult to live away from my partner. I don't like it. We're a very close-knit family and there's a lot of connection time that we share across the day. I don't do well alone. Well, no, that's not true. I love being alone, but I like also being together. So maybe that's the goal. Be alone and together. There actually is research on that. People that live alone but together. We'll do another podcast on that too. Don't turn your life upside down. Just listen to the research. There's good and bad and things we can learn. Just something to note is that we are so lucky and grateful that this series is being supported by the Melbourne Public Humanities Initiative at the University of Melbourne. Thank you for listening to us. Thanks to all your likes, your subscribes, your follows. We are getting some money to support this. Thank you, the Melbourne Public Humanities Initiative. We are so eternally grateful. If you like this episode, if you have comments about this episode, if you hate this episode, tell us. Give us some comments on our Misperceived podcast or at Prof. Leah on Instagram. And also, thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week. Mwah. As per always, thank you for spending time with me on Misperceived, where you don't need a PhD, you just get to come hang out with me. Mwah. This podcast was produced with the support of the incredible Sophie Squires, the wonderful Kate Danger, the fantastic Rich Berner, and the one and only, the best ever made, Serena Reagan. I would like to acknowledge that our podcast is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening today.